罐头厂街是蒙特利湾著名的景点之一，每年都有数以百万计的游客慕名而来，体验丰富多彩的滨水生活。罐头厂街也是诺贝尔文学奖获得者约翰·斯坦贝克开始写作的地方。1945年，他创作了小说《罐头厂街》，使这条街成为美国最著名的街道。然而，很少有人知道，在 Pacific Grove 曾经有过一个叫 Point Alonlis 的华人渔村。1906年5月14日，一场神秘的大火烧毁了 Point Alonlis 渔村，数以百计的华人永远失去了家园。他们甚至被禁止在华人渔村上重建家园。后来，一些渔民搬到了罐头厂街旁边的 McAbee Beach 上，那是蒙特利湾华人渔民最后的避难所。Gerry 是渔村的第五代后人，是他引领我去寻找蒙特利湾消失的华人渔村。我只见过 Gerry 一次，但我却欠他这样一部纪录片。
Gerry and I were together for 50 years. We basically grew up together. So when she passed away, I feel like half of me is gone. That's why when I come down here and I talk about her, I get really emotional about her because I miss her. I actually worked in the farms here in Salinas Valley. And then in 1971, I went to Cal State University, Hayward. It was there in 1971 that I met Gerry, probably the most beautiful Chinese woman that I had seen in a long time. And in fact, I proposed to her on campus when we were seniors. And her first response to me is, "You're crazy. We haven't even graduated from college yet. Why are you asking me this?"
I first met Gerry in 2004 when I had just become the library director at Monterey Public Library. One afternoon, I had a staff person come up to me and say, "There's a woman who's very concerned about a swarm of bees in the parking lot." And I went down to talk to her, and it turned out to be Gerry. And so we started a conversation that soon became very warm and friendly. And she was asking me if I knew about the history of the Chinese in Monterey. And I knew a little bit. She started telling me stories of her ancestor Kwok Moi and her family and the fishing village. And I realized, oh my goodness, there was so much more to be learned about that. 2004 was also when California State University Monterey Bay, I think it was their teledramatics department, had just finished By Light of Lanterns, which was a story about the Chinese fisher people in Monterey. And Gerry was telling me about that, and we wound up inviting her to give the first showing of it in Monterey at the Monterey Public Library in October of 2004.
So in here, in this room here, this exhibit, this is what Gerry saw. It was corrected. It talks about Kwok Moi.
Why Kwok Moi was called the Spanish Mary?
Because she spoke like 5 languages, and she did translating. And according to Gerry, said it was people must have trusted her. You got to trust someone to translate for you.
And at first, Gerry didn't think anything of it, but when she looked at the picture more carefully, she could tell that in the background, Kwok Moi is standing in front of a building with these wooden slats, familiar to her. So when she went home, she asked her mother. Her mother said to her, "Yeah, that's Kwok Moi, that's your great-grandmother." She never knew it until she saw that picture. And then she started to get, really curious, intrigued about, Who is this lady? Where did she come from? Why did she come here? How come no one ever told us the story?
Quoc Moi is the first documented Chinese woman born in the Monterey area. She was born here in August 1859.
Her parents came on a Chinese junk from China, like 1850. They landed at the foot of the Carmel River near Point Lobos.
So this is sort of like our Mayflower here. This Gerry.
This one is from last year.
Last year. This is a great article that Pacific Weekly
Very
did.
well written. Very well.
Gerry learned that history from talking to her aunts and other relatives. So she began to piece together the picture. What was intriguing to Gerry was how come nobody ever spoke about that story? Why did she have to learn about it by accident?
I could feel kind of like the presence of the Chinese here. They built this building in the 1850s. Quoc Moi was born here. Gerry used to come here every time we were in Monterey, and she would come to visit the picture of Quoc Moi and the building itself. It's just not a building. This used to be somebody's house, and here is a person who's a descendant of the person who used to live here.
For California, the peak for here is around Thanksgiving, and then right now we're getting fewer and fewer. This generation has come from however far they come from and ended up here, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones that come back 5 generations later.
The story goes that they went from Point Lobos to another village at Pebble Beach Golf Course. The 19th hole of the Pebble Beach Golf Course is where the Chinese village was. I'm not sure how many years they stayed there, but they moved again from there to a village called Point Alonis, Point Almis, which is in Pacific Grove. In 1906, there was a fire, and that village was burnt down.
Please.
Wow.
Wow.
Some of them have something written on the front of them with an accession number. Some of them don't. But most of them, that he did. So if we could find that number, we might be able to track it down and find the original negative and then take it that way.
Huge project.
Oh, huge.
Somewhere, yes, this is a thumbnail, and somewhere is the big picture, but the question is where?
These.
Chinese.
Okay, yeah. So there's obviously some writing.
Yeah. Oh, can we find the original picture of this?
So we're fortunate that there were some photographers back then that took some very nice photos.
Yeah.
Outdoor shrine in Chinatown after the fire. Yeah, that is
It's a real picture.
It's a real picture, but it's a copy of a real picture.
Can you take it out?
Nobody really knows how the fire started, but if you read Sandy Leiden's book, Chinese Gold, the firemen were putting out the fire and then their hose got cut. Don't know who cut the hose. Because they couldn't get any water, they couldn't fight the fire and the village burnt down. At the same time, when the fire was happening, the Chinese would go into their houses, take out their stuff. The people that were standing around started looting their stuff.
Yesterday, crowds of curious people visited the ruins where Chinatown once stood. They were all eager to obtain some memento of Old Town, which had stood on the shore of the bay for so many a year. The ruins were searched for money and any curious-looking thing that they could find, they took away with them. The ruins were still smoldering in some places. It was one of those disgraceful affairs that cannot be foreseen. We did have people that showed kindness to those who were affected. Ladies and gentlemen occupying fine residences offered and took Chinese women and children home with them for the night and cared for them. Mayor Will Jacks of the city took a Chinese mother and a babe of but a few hours old and the entire family of 6 into his automobile and carried them over to Pacific Grove and made them comfortable in one of his cottages.
The area that the Chinese settled, I believe that there is some evidence that they first settled around the Pacific Grove coastline before the Americans came. They settled when it was under Mexican rule, I believe. And they, then the land, when the Americans came, the Pacific Improvement Company, when Mr. Jacks, oh, I'm going to take this land, and now everybody who's using this land has to pay me the rent because I'm now the landlord. So the Chinese then shifted over and paid the rent to Mr. Jacks. Well, then Mr. Jacks said, now I'm going to make my money, I'm going to sell it to the Pacific Improvement Company. That was what Pebble Beach was beforehand. Well, this was just sort of abandoned coastline that nobody really saw any use for until the trains came through. And then once the train came through, then there was this idea that, oh, because people were interested in going and visiting other areas, so it could become tourism. And then it could become pieces of property they could sell for homes. So at that point, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was no longer convenient to collect rent from fishermen because you could make a lot more money selling off the land for a house or selling off the land for tents or a hotel. Even though the Chinese fishermen had paid rent and had done everything they could within their very limited options to exist there.
Big companies started buying up this land, and one of them was the Pacific Improvement Company. So they bought up the land. The Chinese, as far as I know, could not purchase and own land.
So I believe that it was the smell of their fish that was part of the reason that was given as why we have to kick them off. Because they'd been doing this for decades, and there weren't a lot of people around them when they were doing it. And it used to be Carmel by the Sea, Pacific Grove by God, because Pacific Grove was a Methodist church retreat, and Monterey by the Smell. And so it was, again, the canneries made terrible odors and they had drying fish innards and everything else, but nobody said, let's kick the canneries out.
Takli is the perfect source for the specimens that they're interested in. This is the third president Stanford.
Oh, okay.
Right here, Ray, Lime, and Wilbur.
Wow.
Okay? Ray is really close with Takli.
Watch your steps.
So just a little bit further, based against this rock, was Takli's home.
Gerry's great-grandfather was one of the last to leave the village. He fought it. There were a number of other Chinese who refused to go, and they fought being evicted. They finally decided that they would give up their lawsuit. But as a condition of that lawsuit, they agreed to move the village again. That last village is where Gerry's mother was born. I believe her aunt, who's 106, still alive, was also, born in that village. She's the only living person who was born in that village.
Chinese people in the fishing village didn't just disappear when the village was burned. They figured out a way to stay around. They persevered, making contributions in a positive way. But one of the things that I learned, not from Gerry necessarily, but in my research on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, was that the year before the village was burned was the first year that the Feast of Lanterns took place. And so the second year that the Feast of Lanterns took place, in the summer after the village had been burned, less than half a mile away, when members of the fishing village were still trying to occupy the buildings, still trying to make a legal claim that they still had rights on that property, even though, as Chinese, they're not allowed to testify in court. All of the federal and state laws, rules, and regulations against the Chinese were so horrible, so dehumanizing.
There was a local event in Pacific Grove called the Feast of Lanterns. It is an event that the local community puts on. At the end of the Feast of Lanterns, they have a play that they perform on the beach. And it's basically a play that was written by a Caucasian, and yet it's a story about an Asian family. The primary actors are Caucasian. They dress up in Chinese costumes. And earlier, when this play was going on, some of the participants would paint their faces yellow, or they would kind of like put makeup on their eyes to slant their eyes. This doesn't happen now, but this happened, it did happen. Gerry didn't like the play, and she tried to get it changed. She approached the organizers of the Feast of Lanterns, and they would listen to her, but they never changed it.
I didn't have the strength of character that Gerry did to actually go to the Feast of Lanterns nonprofit board and say, this isn't right, you need to change this. And I think Gerry was ahead of her time.
Gerry and I had conversations all along the way, discuss how do we best navigate change in a way that's positive for everyone. There can be true healing in the community around what has happened in the past, and also that we can move forward to create a community that's safe for everybody. But yes, there was a lot of resistance. There's a lot of white fragility in Pacific Grove. There's a desire to keep the town in a particular way, but that way is unsustainable. What always struck me about Gerry was how much she cared about people, and that she was willing to form a friendship and a bond with me, even though I was the head of an organization that was hurting her community. So I felt that the public apology was a more important piece to catalyze change. And I also felt it was important to call out the white leadership in Pacific Grove. Gerry was somewhat fearful of that because of her past experiences. She also was very excited about the prospect of it. Probably was very excited that I was willing to do that.
And I remember Gerry telling me about how it was very hard for some of her relatives when she started talking about this. And they would say, why are you making a fuss? You know, don't talk about this. So to me, part of it is that fear that this happened. This really happened in our family's history. So maybe we're still afraid about it. I was telling my father about why I thought this was important, and he said, in 1972, we wanted to look at Pebble Beach because your mother wanted some property and have a garden and things. And the real estate agent told your mother, who was American, but not me, I don't think you'd be comfortable in Pebble Beach. They're not very kind to Asian people there. Again, to me, that's not past history, that's pretty current.
I had seen some pushback from our own community, the Chinese community, about an apology. You know, a lot of folks were saying, what good's an apology going to do? Why are you bringing this up now? I would tell them that it's important to do this now, and it's a message to the community that what was done in the past, and even what's done now, is not right.
It was a very emotional process for me to go from really being a champion of the organization and being the president and being a past queen to really realizing the harm it was causing, and then recognize I couldn't lead the organization in a direction that was meaningful. If the Feast of Lanterns still existed, the stories would not be centered in the way that they need to.
Pacific Grove finally adopted an apology resolution after 170 years. Pacific Grove is like one of only 5 cities in the state of California that approved an apology resolution.
I saw the news on her Facebook page that she had actually passed. It was very difficult. She's a huge loss for the community.
The City Council earlier this week unanimously approved for the apology resolution, and I hope that this letter really begins the healing process.
An apology does not change the past. Now, the past is still there, but an apology, if it is a meaningful apology, acknowledges what happened, and it acknowledges your responsibility in what happened, and then you make a commitment to try and do better in the future.
I was carrying a portrait of Gerry that was painted by a friend of hers. So, and it's a picture of her in front of the village. So, in a way, she was part of the walk. And I could feel her walking, and smiling with us. I had a hard time last year. I didn't know if I was going to be able to participate. She would have been so happy, and so proud. I just wish she had been there to see it. Although, I could feel her presence. She spent 10 years trying to make these changes.
And Gerry, it's been a year now since you passed away. I came to Monterey to visit you and the rest of your family. I wanted to let you know that, the kids are doing okay.
Thank you all.
Last year, the walk, there was over 300 people. It was a huge success. We're planning already for the next Walk of Remembrance. I'm here today with Ming Zhao. I believe you met her several years ago at an event in Palo Alto.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
And she told me that she feels bad that she didn't get a chance to do a documentary or story about you.
My great-grandparents' village in Pacific Row was burned down on May 16, 1906. And after that, and my grandfather was born in that village in 1881. But after that, people just didn't talk about it. And many of the people moved far away, but my grandpa only moved a few blocks into Monterey. And so I think because of the proximity of, so close to where the village was burned down, nobody talked about it. So not only do the community sweep the stories under the carpet, but even the Chinese families do. And people ask me, well, how come? And it's like, I don't know, but I think they must have been afraid.
I miss you every day. I wish I could see you one more time. I love you.
1906年的大火烧毁了华人渔村，留下了永久的创伤。时间可以治愈伤口，但伤痛永远不会消失。我对 Gerry 了解的越多，就越想念他。现在你知道了这个故事，火炬已经传到了你的手中。